Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to my series looking back at the 1900s. And in this third installment, I'm going to be taking a deep dive into the world of film. Since I'm starting to find that I can no longer connect with the general population of laypeople through books and music anymore, I'll then ask someone what kind of movies they like. And as it turns out, most people don't partake in those anymore either. People these days seem to just not have the attention span for them and can't make a selection amidst the tens or hundreds of thousands offered on streaming services today. But back in the 1900s, you wouldn't have had that problem. People would actually take the time to pick out a movie that they were actually going to watch and then watch it in full. And there were only a few ways of doing this. You had to either buy tickets to go see it in the theater when it first came out, which many of us did back in those days, or you had to wait for it to come out and then rent it from a movie rental shop or the library, where you would be able to peruse aisles with shelves full of movies that you could look over and read the descriptions of and then make a selection that you'd rent and have to return within a short period of a few days or a week tops. And so you'd have to watch it in that time. Or, of course, you could buy it at a movie store so that you could then own a copy of it if you planned on watching it over and over again. And you could, in some rare instances, even watch it on TV, but with censorship and commercial interruptions. And so, after picking out the movie you wanted to watch and paying for it in most instances, you would then sit there and pay attention to it in a highly focused state for however long it was, 9 minutes, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours, without a cell phone to distract you or infinite other movie recommendations to scroll through on the side. And that wasn't a big deal either. People had the attention spans to pay attention to something for 2 hours or more, easily. And we'd actually take it all in and then talk about it at length afterwards, unlike people today. And back then, before Hollywood went woke feminist and lost its artistic integrity, movies were actually really good and had real heroes that taught us the difference between good and evil. And so we emulated them and learned from them, unlike the girl boss anti-heroes of today. With the change in media, the arts are a thing of the past, and people are getting less intellectual stimulation. Take, for instance, what you're listening to here, a digital recording, which has replaced a little something we used to call film. You see, all these types of content you see on YouTube are similar to what we used to call short films. If you're familiar with the arts, you've probably seen short films before. But what does the word film mean, and what was it? Well, film was a strip that you took pictures on, and when those pictures were taken in large number and shown in quick succession, the pictures would then show moving images. And that's why they were called movies, a nickname for moving pictures, as opposed to single frame images we would look at called still pictures. Still pictures, or photographs, was a fine art that was highly technical and which people would actually pay to go to art galleries to look at and would stand there in front of the images for moments at a time, taking them in and contemplating them. There was actually a lengthy process in producing this kind of media. You see, first of all, you had to understand how a camera worked and how to operate it in order to get the image you wanted to capture onto the film, which would let light in such a way that it would imprint itself on this thin film strip. Then, after imprinting on the film strip needed to be produced into the photographs we would be able to look at, which required a special chemical bath in a special room with special red lighting. If you didn't know how to do this yourself, you could still take pictures on a film strip and then take that film strip from your camera to a special place that would develop the photographs for you. And you would have to wait a whole week to get it back. And you wouldn't be able to see your pictures in that time to make sure they were any good. All right, there was no instant gratification in the art of photography like there is today. And you'd be surprised a week later at how they looked, and many of them wouldn't even come out. And some of them, the film processing lab may have refused to produce for you, like if they were sexual in nature or contained violence or anything like that, which I know because that happened to me at Wegmans. And yet, in spite of the fact that there was no instant gratification in the art of photography, or rather because of the fact that there was no instant gratification in it, and it was a very slow, drawn-out process with many steps involved, there was actually more art to it, and it produced photographic images that were worthy of being displayed in an art gallery and standing in front of and looking upon for moments at a time in contemplation. Now, moving films, on the other hand, or movies, were even more technical to produce than that. And once they became a lengthier and even bigger production than just short films, they involved not just one artist like they had when they were really just an extension of photography, but now whole crews of people. Writers, a director, a cinematographer who took care of the coloring and lighting, lighting designers and a lighting crew, cameramen, and of course, actors to act out the whole plot and all the dialogue, and producers, and so many other crew members as well in the background behind the scenes, and they took years to make. These moving film projects could get to be very great big productions, employing up to 15,000 people or more, and costing often tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. And they only grew more and more over time. The most expensive movies of all time came out recently at about $1 billion. Though, with that event, it has also become apparent that there is a law of diminishing returns when it comes to film investments. And, we see now that the largest, most expensive movies do not automatically become the most successful and popular, and do not automatically get considered the greatest masterpieces of all time, but rather the opposite. They tend to experience a fall off in the quality of the artwork and to be disappointing and sometimes even hard to get through when they are that big and expensive for some reason. And when it comes to size, as I'm sure you already know about movies, they came in two lengths. Of course, short films, which were, between 1 minute and like 20 or 30 minutes or so long, and then what became called feature-length films, which were 90 minutes to 2 hours or more, and were a really big production and a big event that was shown at cinemas, which was a rival to the theater, and were really meant to make an afternoon or an evening of, and to be done with others, like on a date. The way that movies look today, with extremely high budget production value and a lot of special effects, was something that really only came about at the very end of the 1900s. And up until then, movies did not rely upon those sort of things to be good art. And any kind of effects that were required for a film weren't being produced using CGI, but through some kind of real physical means, such as real explosions and different types of filmmaking tricks, like the almost 90 different ones used in the original Nightmare on Elm Street, such as constructing an entire room on an axle so that it could be turned upside down in order to make blood flow upwards to the ceiling through a hole in the bed. All right. And so these types of filmmaking techniques required a lot more work and artistry and, of course, resources and investment than what goes into films today, which are mostly just shot on green screens. And most of what you're seeing in the background behind the actors is all just CGI. Also, remember that for the first half of the 1900s, they didn't even have color in film. And yet, even without color, they were still beautiful and inspiring artistic spectacles. This is because before special effects and expensive production and even color, movies relied upon other creative means to look good, such as the types of compositional techniques that you would see in photography. So the further back in film history you look, the more you can see that movies are really just an extension of still photography, as many of the shots that you see could be taken as a still photograph and hung on the wall, due to how much art and creativity went into framing and making the shot look aesthetically pleasing. You see, back in those ancient times, film was more of a fine art form. And so a good movie back in the 1900s was a real meaningful piece of artwork that had the power to change our cultural narrative and make history, just like a good painting or book could do back in the 17 and 1800s and go on to get taught about in university. A couple examples of movies that were this important to history that I'm sure you've either seen or at least know of are Scarface, which you may only know of the 1980 version, but that was actually a remake of a classic gangster film from 1932, one of the very first gangster films that is the greatest film of all time, in my opinion. And then, of course, The Godfather, which is widely regarded as the greatest film of all time, and like Scarface and other gangster movies, serves to warn us of the dark side of human nature. And then there were some popular movies from the wave of cyberpunk dystopian films in the 1980s and around that time, such as 1984, The Terminator, and then later on, The Matrix. Some other movies that I consider to be some of the best of all time are White Heat, Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, The Godfather Part 2, of course, Martin Scorsese's Casino and Goodfellas, 2001 A Space Odyssey, Woody Allen's Annie Hall, Husbands and Wives, and Bullets Over Broadway, Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, Guy Ritchie's Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, and the more widely known Snatch, Mel Gibson's Braveheart, Heat, The Silence of the Lambs, Alien, Rambo, Back to the Future 1 and 2, and I'll stop there. That's without even getting into the less popular genres such as the old black and white classics, foreign films, horror movies, or B movies, and I could go on and on about great movies, but I'll have to save that for another time. And if any of you are interested in hearing me do a deep dive on what my favorite movies are and what I consider to be some of the best movies of all time, let me know in the comments. If I get multiple of you requesting it, I'll do that. But these movies were such masterpieces that they became classic works of art for the modern era and were so meaningful because there was morals to their story. Morals that often served as a warning to us. Warnings about times to come and the ways in which human nature could take the world if we weren't careful. Warnings which we understood, but for some reason didn't heed. In spite of the fact that these messages became part of the cultural narrative and are often still talked about today, they were also practically ignored as we allowed our culture to go down that dark path that we were taught about by these visionaries and taught to avoid. And so now we have found ourselves here in this place, this cyberpunk dystopia where these classic works of art are now still relevant, because we have arrived at the very place that they tried to prevent. Even the shorter forms of this that we used to watch on TV back in the day, called TV shows, were much more intelligent and had more artistic integrity than the types of entertainment people get on TV today and the types of shows that most people are watching today. Even the ones that were meant to be funny and were just supposed to be mainly for fun, lighthearted entertainment were still often more intelligent and intellectual and thought-provoking and had lessons and morals to them, such as my favorite, which was Seinfeld, and was not only the funniest comedy to ever air on TV, but was also about social commentary and got me thinking sociologically from a very young age, even about some adult themes that were way beyond my years at the time, but which got me used to thinking about social situations more objectively and considering, things from different points of view, and also inspired me to go into the social sciences and be able to think naturally in sociological ways, which is what I ended up doing as a career as an adult for about a decade and a half or so. So, that kind of intelligent, intellectual TV show that was also very funny and entertaining, of course, really helped me to become a more thoughtful and mindful person and to think sociologically, and helped to shape me in my personal development growing up into the adult and professional person that I would become. But that's something that the types of entertainment that people are getting now just doesn't do for them, right? Because it has been so dumbed down. It just does not have the same artistic integrity and creativity and intelligence that we used to get from our TV shows. It doesn't teach any sorts of lessons or morals or make people think in any kind of way. Rather, the opposite. It is totally mindless entertainment. And since the good old days of real film back in the 1900s, all recorded media has been on a downward trajectory, and the standards have just gotten so low. Why? Because with digital recording replacing film and making it easier for anyone to create, and quicker too, something that can be done with instantaneous results and thus instant gratification, much of the visual art has been removed from it and our culture. Now that the technology does most of the work for us, it no longer requires the same artwork. The key word there being work, and thus the artistic mastery that would come from investing a large deal of time and work developing your craft is absent. Now, everyone can afford to buy a recording device and record things with the touch of a button. It requires no real work or effort, and so there is little creativity and art to be found in it. Photography, for one, is no longer an art form that people go to art galleries to view in awe and become inspired by. Instead, all of the hundreds of millions of modern narcissists around the world upload their shitty selfies of themselves multiple times a day without even taking the time to properly frame the shot. And if it's not a selfie, it's some other bullshit from their life that they are attempting to show off without it even being properly framed, such as showing everything in portrait mode, not even bothering to show landscapes themselves in landscape mode as it is supposed to be, which is a term they probably don't even know in spite of them taking more photographs than professionals of old ever did. The average phone now has thousands of photographs on it for the person to scroll through, none of which they'll ever actually go through in any kind of meaningful way as an artist used to in photography. In fact, often when they upload them, they end up getting notified by the viewers of something about it that they hadn't even noticed. That is, in the odd case that anyone even paid attention to the post, the pictures at all, which never happened to me when I was on social media, in spite of the fact that I would actually post real photography taken with real cameras, and that's probably why no one was paying attention to it. In fact, the only times anyone ever paid attention to pictures that I was posting on social media was when I was a PUA and nightclub promoter, posting pictures of the hot girls I'd pick up at the nightclub events I was promoting. And even then, it was only the hottest ones who garnered any attention whatsoever. And to think, film used to be a media that was for making interesting observations about the world and sharing those visually with others who could be inspired by the image. But that simply isn't happening today. In order to have that effect on people today, you need to use the video format of your device and make sure it's something incredibly impressive, but only about 6 seconds long, as the human attention span is now lower than that of a goldfish, which is 8 seconds. And so, if you're a writer like me, you can't expect people to read even so much as a full sentence. So you shouldn't bother writing any kind of meaningful captions explaining your photographs that you post as an artist. You can't even expect people to read full paragraphs. So why bother writing things like articles or books? As an author who used to make a decent living off of my work, while the quality of my writing has increased over the years, my sales are declining, and I'm making very little off of them now. The same thing happened to me as a public speaker and YouTuber. My quality went up over time, as did the depth and the importance of my topics, but somehow my success went down. Nowadays, people just simply do not have the attention span for art or anything of the intellectual nature, for that matter. The media we pay attention to has changed greatly, and not for the better. The content that people are paying attention to these days is now being called brain rot content that has effectively retarded everyone's brains. The modern media of the Matrix has turned everyone into a bunch of brain-dead NPC Philistines. And for me, it's scary, like being in a zombie movie, which is probably why zombie movies are so popular these days, because they are very relatable. And the culprit is, of course, cell phones. They are the actual matrix that people are plugged into that is zapping their brains and turning them into drones. Even people who grew up way back in the mid-1900s, too, like some of our family members, and should have been inoculated against these things, have still also somehow fallen prey to them. But the problems don't stop here. For cell phones didn't just change the media content we consumed. So let's change topics now and do an even deeper dive into the other issues they've caused, the social issues, which are coming up next in part 4, where I'm going to talk about the very foreign concept of friendship. So make sure your subscription is set to all and watch out for that release. Or you can also check the description below to see if it has already been released. And you can also check out my videos section of the channel to take a look through all of the other short videos that I have released for you. And otherwise, I'll talk to you guys in the next one.